So Che Guevara, he wants to spread revolutions throughout all South America. He goes to Bolivia, and eventually, with the CIA's help and the Bolivian government, they find Che Guevara. And as he's face down with his would-be assassin, he goes, "Shoot, you dog! You're only gonna kill a man." And that was Che Guevara's end of his life. Then he shot, and he was dead. But that happened in Bolivia, and that happened in the 60s or 70s or so. And then Bolivia is now the center stage for the socialist revolution. There's a left-leaning socialist revolution that's happening right now in America's so-called backyard. It's not. It's really the front yard. I don't know why they say back. It's more the front yard, right? Because it's right in front of us. But we have done several things actually in the vicinity, and lots of interventions, American interventions with Latin America in the past decade, as long as many decades beforehand. Let's talk about the Honduras coup d'etat. Three recent moments contributed to a rapid readjustment of expectations with the Obama administration. The coup in Honduras, that's 2009, first year he's in office, right? Talking about closing Guantanamo Bay. Meanwhile, carrying on with and we also saw at the DEA, getting old grandmas with medical, dispensaries in states that have legalized marijuana, legalized medical marijuana, such as Kentucky. CBD, right? Cannabidiol is illegal in Kentucky. Three recent moments have contributed to a rapid readjustment of expectations. First was the coup in Honduras and the refusal of U.S. to take proactive policy measures against it. And then we accepted Pepe Lobo, right? He's clearly a USA puppet. But Pepe Lobo, yeah, he's good. Let's keep him in. So even though Obama covers all of it up, hey, I'm smiling, I'm saying stuff on camera, behind the scene, there's always seems to be other goings-ons. But he's definitely institutionalizing and carrying on the empire, right? So he's taken Bush's spot, and he has escalated most of Bush's policies. He's got a policy of preemption, policy of we rule the world, policy of do as whatever we like, shoot first, ask questions later. So we've seen a coup in Honduras. That was 2009. America did that, okay? And there's also another thing, too. Since it's clear that American interests are against the leftist, communist, socialist governments out there, when you get somebody that's a group that says, hey, we'll be right-wing Nazis, and as long as you give us money, the American government might be able to finance a group or some people and be the vanguard, the face of it, and it looks like the people's taking it over, or they could turn a blind eye to something that's happening, So they can intervene in order to steal people's resources, but will they intervene if something bad actually happens? So the very identical thing happens to Zelaya or whatever, the guy in Honduras president that happened to Aristide. They show up, they shove them into a plane, they fly them to a different country. So they don't have to, be criticized for killing the guy, right? It wasn't a coup d'etat, like a violent coup d'etat. After Aristide, they kidnapped him and they held him for like 3 years, and then they restored him. But that's after 3 years, so he didn't get to govern, the majority of his time that he was the actual governor. So we've done this several times. Ecuador in 2010 and Venezuela in 2002. And Hugo Chavez's actual story is remarkable, okay? So Hugo Chavez is a revolutionary. He changed the game. Hugo Chavez was a game changer. He died recently of cancer. But Hugo Chavez, he had, the people brought him back to power. So 2002 was an attempted coup, and then they found out about it, and then the people went to the streets to try to bring him back to power. Same thing in 2010, Ecuador against Rafael Correa. So Rafael Correa is the president, and supposedly the police had him detained, and they were holding him, and people didn't know what was going on. So it was a coup d'etat in progress. The whole world was watching. And we've done this several times. We've done it in Guatemala, and El Salvador, Nicaragua, Chile. Salvador Allende in 1973, you had Kissinger is going to make the economy scream with the Chicago boys, and supposedly they got Allende to kill himself, right? So they put a gun into it. They shot Allende and put a gun in his hand because he was a socialist president. And that was it. That was his crime. So they don't like any economic system that questions the ruling oligarchical aristocrat, the people that's running the government, the people that's behind the scenes. So you got the government officials, but then you got the rich corporate, benefactors right behind them. And so those are the people that's pushing for all this violence to happen against people that's actually truly for the people. We saw it in Honduras in '63. We see it in 1954 coup in Guatemala. And then we see decades of civil war afterwards. Salvador Allende in Chile was actually because death squads. Pinochet ruled with an iron fist for about 20 years in Chile. So because of America involvement, because of the CIA, and because of the assassination of Salvador Allende, you saw Chile that was descended into basically a totalitarian fascist state. So it was the corporations backing fascism by any means necessary. And so people say, look at Chile, it's a capitalist wonderland now because they did what was right. Now they have, and that might be true and it might not be. I wish I could actually look at Chile a little bit closer, because the way it looks like to me, the students are protesting. They're out in the streets. They don't like what's going on, right? And so there's clear dissatisfaction with the political establishment. So if it was good, would they be out there? Or is there a middle class that allows them to be out there? So it could be one or the other. But, to justify 2 decades, that's a horrible price to put on another country. And this is what America does in all over. So Latin America, they know what's going on, but Americans are woefully ignorant of all the things that I'm saying right now. Evo Morales' his challenges to America are fascinating. He threatened to kick the U.S. Embassy out. He didn't want the DEA. He said cocaine was now illegal because it was a drug for the Indians, for the Native Americans. That's what they did. He was the first indigenous president. Evo Morales. 95% of Bolivians are Indians, indigenous to the continent. So how come they've been electing all these other non-Indian people for so long? It's the Stockholm Syndrome. It's the reason why Haiti is black power, proud, and then the other half is Santo Domingo is embarrassed and whitish, right? Okay, so Monroe Doctrine, that was basically we're allowed to intervene in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. It's more of a show of force for the European powers. These are our countries. We can meddle, you can't. And so we still meddle. We still meddle. We're an empire, okay? Grenada, right? The tiny island of Grenada was going to invade America, so Ronald Reagan scared America, scared them to death, right? The great communicator, okay, my Americans, Grenada, military operations have commenced in Grenada. I mean, maybe there are ties to the Soviet Union, maybe there aren't. If you are a peaceful, elected socialist country and you don't have military backing, it seems almost foolish for them not to reach out to the Soviet. Look, they're not going to like me, so. And Obama hasn't been talking to the leftist countries. Hugo Chavez gave him that one book. But Hugo Chavez was a very, very virulent critic of the Bush administration. So, of course, they used the CIA to go after him in 2002. There's 3 things that happened. So the coup in the Honduras coup, the 7 new military bases in Colombia. The 3rd was the Secretary of State Clinton's declaration with Latin American countries should think twice about flirting with Iran. So, you leftist countries, you watch out. The willingness of Latin American countries to challenge U.S. positions indicates a slowly changing balance of power in the hemisphere soon after Arturo. So I want to mention the 2002 Venezuelan coup. So these are in modern history. This is right. For 2004 was Haiti, 2002 Venezuela, 2009 Honduras, 2010 Ecuador. We're still meddling in leftist countries. Their only crime is that they elected a leader that's going to be not pro-American corporations and capitalism. And like Coca-Cola or McDonald's couldn't succeed in Bolivia. They just couldn't succeed. And they couldn't succeed in Bolivia because the people of Bolivia wanted good food. They wanted good food products. So that was just the culture. So I don't see how you can get, any other people elected besides leftist-leaning leaders when you have people there that just can't stomach Americanism, let alone, vote for it or popularly support it. So, failed coup d'etat, April 11, 2002, Hugo President Chavez, who had been elected in 2000, so he's been in office for two maybe 1.5 years. He was ousted from office for 47 hours before being restored by a combination of military loyalists and a massive public support for his government. Hugo Chavez was initially detained by members of the military and pro-business elites represented by Venezuela Federation of Chambers of Commerce. President Pedro Carmona, who was declared as the interim president. Carmona's brief rule saw the Venezuelan National Assembly and the Supreme Court both dissolved and the country's 1999 constitution declared void. In Caracas, the coup led to a popular pro-Chavez uprising that the Metropolitan Police unsuccessfully tried to suppress. Key sectors of the military and parts of the anti-Chavez movement also refused to back Carmona. The pro-Chavez Presidential Guard eventually retook the presidential palace without firing a shot, leading to the collapse of the Carmona government and the reinstallation of Chavez as president. The coup was publicly condemned by leaders of Latin American nations. The Rio Group then gathered in San Jose, Costa Rica at the time, who issued a joint communique to that effect. And on the other hand, the United States and Spain both acknowledged the pro-U.S. Carmona forces as the de facto government, but ended up choosing to condemn the coup once it became clear that the plotters had been unsuccessful. So Spain and U.S. was like, hey, you know, fuck Chavez. Carmona is the real governor. I don't know why Spain was jumping on board. Maybe Spain is just getting sad about not being around or something. I don't know. Spain. What does Spain have to do? The revolution will not be televised. Documentaries, let's see. Opposition supporters argued that Chavez's government was becoming an undemocratic, favored a portion of the population. The coup had been planned for 6 to 9 months before the decision to try to overthrow Chavez came on the heels of what they hoped were a number of controversial laws Chavez passed that November, reforming Venezuela's national oil company, a general strike. So oil, right? It's all about the oil. Chavez supporters claimed that unidentified snipers were responsible for the deaths. So they said that they were fired upon, and they were also firing at an empty street. So that's Hugo Chavez, R.I.P. In 2001, the Bolivarian revolution proposed by President Chavez began to take form. The oil industry was in the process of being restructured. Hydrocarbon laws were passed that would allow for a redistribution of oil profits, and Chavez was recuperating an industry nationalized in 1976 that was on the path of privatization. Opposition began to grow internally in Venezuela, primarily composed of the economic and political elite that ruled the country throughout the prior 40 years. Now unhappy with real changes taking effect aligned with those interests were the owners of Venezuela's media outlets, television, radio, and print, which belonged to the old oligarchy in the country. In 2001, President Chavez attended the Summit of the Americas meeting in Quebec, Canada. By now, Washington had undergone its own changes, and George W. Bush had moved into the White House. Baby Bush was present at the meeting in Quebec, and there announced the U.S. plan to expand free trade throughout the Americas, the Free Trade of the Americas Act, FTAA. Hugo Chavez was the only head of state at the summit to oppose Washington's plan. It was the first showing of his insubordination to the agenda of the U.S. government. Later that year, after the devastating and tragic attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City, Washington began a bombing campaign in Afghanistan. Baby Bush did, right? President Chavez publicly declared the bombing of Afghanistan, the killing of innocent women and children, as an act of terror. This is the fighting terror with more terror, he declared on national television October 2001. The declaration produced Washington's first official response. U.S. Ambassador to Caracas at the time, Donna Hinack, paid a visit to Chavez in the presidential palace shortly after. During her encounter with the Venezuelan president, she proceeded to read a letter from Washington demanding Chavez public retract his statement about Afghanistan. The Venezuelan head of state declined the request and informed the U.S. ambassador that Venezuela is now a sovereign state, no longer subordinate to U.S. power. They was recalled to Washington. New ambassador was sent to Venezuela, an expert in coup d'etats. Washington organizes the coup. As Washington's concern grew over the changes taking place in Venezuela and the insubordination of the Venezuelan president, business groups and powerful interests inside Venezuela began to contemplate Hugo Chavez's removal. Those running the state oil owned oil company, PDVSA, PDVSA. So PDVSA is the oil company, but adamant to defend the positions, control of the company, as well as their mass profits, which instead of being invested in the country were being coveted in the oil executives' pockets. A U.S. entity created by U.S. Congress in 1983, overseen by the State Department, National Endowment for Democracy, NED, began to channel hundreds of thousands of dollars to groups inside of Venezuela to help consolidate the opposition movement and to create a coup.